for Inside Utah Politics with Lindsay Aerts.
Well, thanks for joining us today. I am Lindsay Aerts. Let's go inside Utah politics. Utah Attorney General Derek Brown says all states are a border state. That was the message when he visited the southern border in Yuma, Arizona this week. He met there with the Republican Attorney Generals Association. Brown and others say they're concerned about fentanyl popping up in their states.
The DEA recently announced the largest drug bust in history, including, among other things, 3 million fentanyl pills. There were 5 states involved in that drug bust. One of them, in fact, was the state of Utah, my state. So like I said, we are all border states.
Well, Brown also highlighted what Utah is doing to address illegal immigration at home. For example, he says the Utah Department of Corrections will work with ICE to hand off undocumented offenders in Utah's prison. Well, I'm joined today by AG Derek Brown. Derek, thank you for joining me.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
It's good to be with you. Okay, so let's just start there. Federal, our state going to work with ICE to hand off illegal immigrants that we detain here. How is that different? Was that not already happening here in Utah?
Not much. The current administration made some changes in terms of what it means to work and to collaborate. And really, this is the reason that we, as a group, went to Yuma yesterday. And the reason we did it is because there are 10 different states with attorneys general who are seeing impacts from what happens there in their states. And so not even just Western state attorneys general. We had folks from the Carolinas, we had Montana, Indiana, and that's why we said every state is in fact a border state. I mean, we don't have a southern border, but the reality is every state's a border state because the impact of what happens there at the border has a massive impact here. I mean, when drugs cross the border.
It's the drugs, right? That's the issue.
Right now, this is the huge issue, absolutely, because when drugs cross the border, they're in Utah within a matter of hours. I mean, they go up I-15, there's other corridors, but they make their way here, and then the impact of what happens on the border in Yuma, we see in downtown Salt Lake City. I mean, there's a real impact with the people that you see and drugs and crime, and a lot of it is focused there in Mexico.
And are we focusing in the right areas when we say that the drugs are coming basically up I-15? How do we stop them before they make that trek? Because it seems like in Utah, we sort of address them once they're already here.
Right.
But it seems like the cartels are running them, right? There's a lot bigger organization than just they're coming up to Utah.
Well, and that's one of the reasons that we focus on what takes place at the border, because most of this comes across the southern border. And so, I mean, as we mentioned, the largest drug bust in history took place just a few weeks ago by the DEA. And interestingly, one of the states involved in that drug bust was here, it was Utah. And so those drugs have an impact. And we're seeing, I mean, it's nice that we finally are seeing a decrease in opioid deaths, which is fantastic, but we're seeing a corresponding increase in fentanyl deaths that's outpassing what's taking place in opioids. And so we're winning one fight, but we're losing another fight even worse than the one that we're winning. And so that's why we've got to go back. That's why we're looking at the border. That's why we're trying to figure out how do we stop that flow of drugs, because their impact. We had a small toddler that just overdosed on fentanyl in eastern Utah. I mean, this is permeating every aspect of our society here.
Republicans have largely taken the issue of immigration and ran with it since President Trump was elected. But sometimes it feels like the party, or at least kind of the Republicans that are working on this, have a little bit of a messaging problem. We saw that with President Trump and the due process issues. Sometimes it seems like there's a lack of compassion when, our country relies on immigrant labor, things like that. How do you root out the criminals but not create this message of fear where people are afraid to go to court, for example, because they're afraid of being detained?
Well, we want to be compassionate. I mean, and we also have to keep in mind the human element to this. One of the reasons we went to Yuma was not just to stand at the border. Actually, we spent the bulk of our time at Yuma meeting with individuals who provided services for those who came across the border. I mean, Yuma's about 110,000 people. Last year, about 300,000 people came through Yuma, which meant that there were services that needed to be provided, healthcare services, therapeutic services, food. I mean, the food pantry worked overtime. There's a human element. And so that's one of the things that we did, is to figure out how do we address the fact that we can look at these individuals as illegals, or we can look at them as real human beings with needs. There's a reason they're here. There's a reason they're doing what they are. But it's also a humanitarian crisis when we let happen what happened the last 4 years. I mean, it's really, seeing it firsthand, the impact on that area, and the number of people who were abused along the way. I mean, it's really tragic.
Do you think your party's doing a good enough job of humanizing this issue?
Well, I think we have to do even better, but I think what we're trying to do to begin with is to stop the flow, because last year there was an average of about 1,500 people crossing every day. Now it's down to, on average, 4. So when you've gone from 1,500 men, women, and children down to 4, you've not only stopped that flow, you've stopped the number of individuals who have been just left. I talked to one agent who said that she found literally 3 children, 3 sisters, who were young, and they had a note with them saying what their names were. And it basically said, if you find them, here's where they go. And they were in the middle of the desert. I mean, those are the kinds of things that we need to stop. And so we've got, I think a lot of that is under control, but the drugs are still coming. We've seen a decrease in drugs coming across the border, but they're still making their way here. And there's a massive impact on everyday lives here in Utah because of it.
You were supposed to meet with the czar, Tom Holman, while you were there. He didn't end up making the trip, but you did meet with AG Pam Bondi. What was her message?
She wasn't there, but we did have county commissioners.
Okay.
We did have the Senate president. We had a lot of the local sheriffs.
Okay.
And they were the ones who really were the ones, they were on the ground. They were the ones who could talk about just what it's like to have a city of 110,000 all of a sudden have 300,000 people flow through. And so really part of it was just to get the humanizing element, because these are people. Mm-hmm. And we want to be sympathetic, but we also want to stem the flow of these drugs, because this is having a devastating impact. Not just here. I mean, it's funny, I had certain things I wanted to say about Utah and the impact on Utah in this press conference. And as I listened to 9 other attorneys general from around the country, they all said almost exactly the same thing I was saying. I mean, what's happening in Indiana and South Carolina are no different than what's happening in Utah. That's why we say every state is a border state.
But back to this culture of fear kind of thing that it feels like we maybe have in our country right now. Salt Lake County's district attorney has told us that they've created programs to encourage witnesses of crime and those who don't have legal status here to still come forward, because these folks are feeling fearful to go into any a criminal setting, justice setting, a court, for example, or the courthouse even, to report crime. So as we sit here and listen to you say you want to stop fentanyl, you want to stop crime, but some of these people who can do that are now fearful of even going in. I mean, how do you balance that and the fact that at least Salt Lake County needed a program like this to encourage people?
I think part of it is as we've always talked for years, we need to address the issue at the border first, and then these issues are just corollary. These are outgrowths. I mean, the reality is something that I talked with a woman who was in charge of social services in this area, primarily with children. And as we were talking about what happened on the border, she said, the thing that concerns me about states like Utah is that there are thousands of children there, and we don't know where they are. Nobody has sort of kept track of them. And people who are here, both illegally, who don't speak the language, are in a much higher likelihood of being extorted, and they're vulnerable.
So wouldn't that say they
vulnerable
need
population?
Resources, not not disparagement.
Yes, but we need to first stop the flow of those individuals who are here and can be exploited, and that's the real concern, is you have these vulnerable populations. And so you're basically saying, can we balance both? And I think the answer is yes. The first thing we need to do is stem the flow of people coming here illegally, and then we need to work on how we address that issue. And I think the first has largely been done. There's very little going on at the border other than drugs, and they're working on that as well. But that's having its impact. But there's a human element to this, and I freely admit that that's something that I think we need to keep working on, because these are people, they're in our communities. Yeah. They go to school with our kids.
And our state relies on immigrant labor. And
it does. Every state does.
Every state does. In our last just 20 seconds, what else do you want your office to do to tackle this immigration issue? What else are you working on?
Well, primarily we are looking at fentanyl is going to be the single biggest issue that we deal with as a state from a criminal standpoint. So I brought someone over to run my criminal department from the U.S. Attorney's Office who has a career of working in this issue. And so this is something that we'll be focusing on, and you'll hear me talk about it a lot in the next couple of years.
We'll see how it works out. Utah Attorney General Derek Brown, thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate it. Well, still ahead on Inside Utah Politics, counting down the days to the Utah Democratic Party convention. Candidates for the chair of the party will join us next to share their vision. Stay with us.
You're watching Inside Utah Politics with Lindsay Aerts.
Well, welcome back. The Democratic Party will hold their organizing convention this Saturday at Ogden High School. They, too, will be electing new party leadership. That new leadership team will face big questions of how to capitalize on local gains while the national party faces something of a post-election crisis. Well, I'm joined today by two of the four candidates who are running for party chair, former Salt Lake County Party Executive Director Ben Peck and former gubernatorial candidate and House Minority Leader Brian King. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining me today.
Thank you.
Okay, let's dive right in. It is no secret that Republicans dominate this state, and we are in a super minority here in Utah. But Utah Democrats, they've not been elected to a statewide office in about 3 decades. How do you change that? Ben, let me start with you.
Well, it's not going to happen overnight, but I think that what we need to start doing is competing everywhere. We've heard a lot from the DNC now about going back to a 50-state strategy, and I think that we need to do a similar thing here in Utah. We can't just focus on a couple of districts in Salt Lake County. We need to be competing everywhere, all across our state, down in the south and every part. We need to be showing up, and a lot of people probably have no idea that there is a Utah Democratic Party because they've never seen or heard from them. So we need to change that, and that's what I want to do as party chair.
Brian, let me pose the same question to you. How do you change Democrats getting elected in this state?
I think we've got to have a message that resonates with Utahns. I think we've got to be communicating about things that they care about, things that the problems and issues that they deal with on a day-to-day basis. What we see from way too many Republican office holders and candidates is culture war issues, trying to push our emotional buttons, trying to divide us, trying to talk about things that are diverting our attention from the things that people really care about and need to hear about. We as Democrats are addressing policy issues that people care about and that they deal with in their day-to-day lives. And I think we have to make sure people understand that.
Talk to me about why you each wanted to run the Democratic Party in Utah. It's a tough sell right now for a lot of people. Candidates don't feel like they've got a party that can really bolster them and get them elected. Again, statewide candidates haven't been elected. So why did you want to take this on?
Well, honestly, that's a lot of the reason why I wanted to take it on is I've worked with candidates for the past 7 years here in Utah, helping them get elected, and I'm close friends with many of them. And it's incredibly disheartening to feel like the party doesn't have your back, that it's not effective. And ultimately, that's why I wanted to jump in, is because I know that I have the skills and the dedication that we need. I am at a point in my life where I can dedicate my entire working days to this, and I can't imagine doing anything else with what we're seeing nationally and here locally.
Yeah, interesting. Brian, for you?
Well, when you have a supermajority in the legislature, you basically have a monopoly on political control here in Utah. And monopolies are no good for people. I mean, they're terrible for consumers, of course. We all know that. But what people don't recognize as clearly is that the monopoly that the Republican Party has on state policy and politics right now is no less harmful. It's incredibly bad for the future of the state of Utah to have one party calling all the shots. So having a more competitive environment is something that I've tried to accomplish at the legislature, and we've got terrible things going on at both the federal and the state level right now. And I saw that. I saw the election of Donald Trump, and I just thought this is something that I want to be a part of in terms of trying to communicate more effectively to Utahns about why it is that the Democratic Party reflects their values and priorities.
Let me ask you why. Why do you believe that the Democratic Party reflects Utah values? Again, we do live in a majority Republican state. So talk to me about your platforms and how and what you believe about the party. Brian, let me switch to you to go first.
Sure. Well, there are a lot of things that I think, ways in which the Democratic Party lines up with Utah's values. But probably the most important one that we see being infringed on right now is we need government back in its position where it needs to be. We need it out of our lives. We need it out of our homes. There's government overreach by this legislature and by Donald Trump and his administration left and right, whether it's what books we can read and have our children read, whether it's reproductive rights, the government telling us about when, as between communications between pregnant women and families and their doctors, what they'll do, when they'll do it. Those are all things that are just not in line with Utah values. So the first thing I think is government overreach is a real problem.
Ben, how about for you?
Well, I completely would agree with what Brian said about government overreach, and I do think that that aligns very well with a lot of people. I grew up in Riverton, Utah, to Republican parents. All of my friends that I grew up with were Republican. And I think that the message of getting the government out of our lives is absolutely something that we should lead with. In addition, I believe that we have something to offer and that we believe that public servants should be servants of the people and should not be getting bribes or being corrupt in any other way. We believe that morality shouldn't stop when you take the oath of office. If anything else, it should be more so. And we also believe that people who put in a full day's work should be able to afford to live. Those are very simple things that I think resonate in my experience with a lot of voters all across this state.
We spent some time criticizing Republicans here, I should say you guys have, but how do you work with them? In a state like this, you can't get anything done unless you work with them. What is your philosophy on that? Ben, go ahead.
Well, I do think realistically, we do need to work with them. I don't necessarily believe that it's the role of the Utah Democratic Party to do that. I understand that our legislators need to do that and our elected officials will need to do that. What I think the job of the Democratic Party, though, is to give our vision and get our candidates elected, and then our elected officials can negotiate once they're in office. But I don't want to start negotiating before we even have power. But I do think that there are opportunities for us to work with other Republicans who on specific issues. I mean, Tyler Clancy, I disagree with him on a lot of issues, but he and Representative Matthews have also come together to do a lot of good things for working people. So I think that there are those opportunities.
Brian, you've had to work with many a Republican from your days in the state legislature. How do you view it?
Well, I think it requires good social skills and working relationships on a personal level. Once you get to know someone personally, you find that some of the political differences that kept you apart before become reduced and lowered, and you can get things done. But I also think it's true that the party leadership needs to recruit candidates for office that are attractive to Utahns, that reflect Utah values, and that they themselves will be in a position to be able to work with Republicans. It is true, of course, in a super majority state like ours, when you're in the super minority status, you have to figure out how to get votes from Republicans. And you do that by finding common ground and by listening to the people and what they want. And then when you have an idea about what they want, you go to your folks on the other side of the aisle, your friends, and sometimes even your enemies, and say, can't we find some common ground to address this specific thing that Utahns want?
A part of what the party needs to do for its candidates is help get them elected, raising money, right, is part of that apparatus too. Brian, is the party solvent right now? How do you raise money? How do you fundraise? How do you get your big donor class? There are Democratic donors in the wings here in Utah who don't feel like they have a party to give to. How do you change that?
Thank you for that question. It's a great question. The party is solvent right now. Diane Lewis and the leadership team that are the current party leaders have done a good job in making sure that we're in the black, not in the red. But there is great opportunity to approach, as you say, people who are very interested and involved in national politics and haven't really committed themselves or invested in local politics with the Utah State Party. I think that there's great opportunity to speak with those individuals and help them understand that there's real value in investing locally, especially since the Democrats are out of power on the national level. Utah's where we need to get support and investment for building a party from the grassroots, from the bench, to win elections in Utah. Ben,
your fundraising strategy?
Yeah, I mean, we are thankfully solvent, and over the years, the Utah Democratic Party spends about $1 million a year, which I think would shock most people because it doesn't seem like we're getting much for it. And I think that that's also part of the reason why it's been hard for us to expand beyond that. We've been kind of level in our fundraising for many years. And these donors that you're talking about, like up in Park City and Summit County, that spend millions of dollars donating to Democrats across the country, the way that we convince them to keep their money here is by showing them that we can actually win here. And I think that having someone like me as chair who has a proven track record of winning competitive elections, getting Democrats elected here in Utah, I can go to them and credibly tell them that I have a plan. I have done this before. I can get Democrats elected here. That's how we convince them to bring their money back home.
Your convention is coming up on May 31st. Illinois Governor J.D. Pritzker going to speak at that convention. He has kind of been seen as a national firebrand for your party to be able to kind of unite the opposition against President Donald Trump. How does he bring his message to Utah and resonate, and why is that get, so to speak, for lack of a better word, so important, Brian?
Well, I think Governor Pritzker has been very clear and direct in standing up for speaking about values and things that Democrats across the country, not just Democrats, but regular Americans have been concerned about from the Trump administration. I like the fact that he's direct, that he's unequivocal, that he has some fire, and that he has some focus. And I think that the delegates are going to appreciate hearing that. And I think many, many Utahns, of course, there is a substantial number of Utahns who are Donald Trump supporters, and you're not going to move them. But there are a lot of Utahns who are disillusioned. They're disappointed with that, with what we see from the Trump administration. J.B. Pritzker is a great spokesperson to come out and say, here's what we need to do differently.
Ben, what's the message that Utah Democrats need to hear at their convention to bolster the party, to give them some sense of hope that, like you both believe, Democrats have a shot of getting some statewide representation?
Well, I think that, like Brian said, one of the best things about J.B. Pritzker, Governor Pritzker, is that he can rile up a crowd. He tells it like it is. He just is very brash, and I think that that's something we've been missing here. I mean, yes, Utahns are nice. That's a thing we hear a lot. But also people like when you're honest with them, when you're direct. And that's what we need more of in this party. And I think the message we need to take to people is we can win, but it's not going to be easy. And we need you to buckle down with us and do the work. And we're not going to apologize for being Democrats. We're not going to be ashamed of it. We're not going to just try and get a couple of pity bills passed every year in the legislative session. We're here to win. And I think people need to hear that message. We're not here to just get a consolation prize. We're here to win.
We shall see how this all turns out when your Democrats cast their ballots on May 31st in your Democratic state convention. So good luck to both of you. We'll be watching to see how it turns out. Ben Peck and Brian King, both candidates for chair of the Democratic Party. Also want to mention that there are two other candidates who did not respond to our request to be here today, Archie Williams and then Jonathan Lopez. So invite you to go check out all the candidates and see who you want to vote for. Well, coming up on Inside Utah Politics, lawmakers return to Salt Lake City and to the Capitol, how they handled major questions of education and election security during these summer interim days. Stay with us. Well, Utah lawmakers were back in Salt Lake City at the Utah Capitol this week to hash out both some hot-button issues and some of the more mundane work of government, audit reports, rule changes, new areas of study, and more. So we've put together a list of highlights. Now, lawmakers on the Public Utilities Committee will allow Rocky Mountain Power to raise their rates by a little over 4%. That's about $4 more a month on Utah families' power bills, but that's a far cry from the nearly 33% hike Rocky Mountain Power originally requested. Now, some lawmakers on the Education Committee, meanwhile, are concerned about school lunch times. Advocates reported to them that some students have as little as 20 minutes to eat lunch, leading to high waste of food. And then the drought reared its ugly head on Utah's Capitol Hill. The Department of Natural Resources telling lawmakers that water conservation will be key this summer after a less than stellar winter. Now, there was also a heated hearing about the results of a signature gathering audit from earlier this year. You can find a full breakdown of that meeting on abc4.com/politics. Well, that does it for today's Inside Utah Politics. Don't forget, if you have any local political stories you'd like to see, make sure you reach out. You can email InsideUtahPolitics@abc4.com. You can also follow along with me on social media. I'm on X, Blue Sky, and Threads. Just search for Lindsay on Air. That's on Instagram too. Lindsay spelled with an A. You can also find our show online or in podcast form. Wherever you podcast, there's bonus content up there too. Just search for Inside Utah Politics with Lindsay Aerts anywhere you get your podcasts. Well, thanks for being with us, everyone. We will see you next week.